Hello, it is the 3rd of April 2011, and this is a Mayan calendar update. And in this video, I'm going to go over the 13 cycles that I am familiar with, or the ones that I have felt to be the most accurate that I know of, what each cycle's consciousness contains of. This first one was action and reaction, as well as some predictions within this, mainly towards the economic point of view as well as silver. Therefore, like I said, the first cycle, the only consciousness that came into play was action and reaction. For more on this matter, I recommend the works of Ian Lungold, the late Ian Lungold, Dr. Carl Calleman, as well as the Mayan Calendar video series I put out a little over a year ago. So if you want to know more, I would recommend that because I'm only going to go over a few different aspects. Within the time that is left within this 13 stage cycle, what happens is each cycle contains less of amount of period as the one that preceded it. For example, the first cycle lasted about 3 billion years. When you subtract 14.9 billion to 11.8 billion. And each one contains less amount of time for the same amount of evolution or creation within the world. As the Ian Lungold has stated, that within each cycle, everything moves 20 times faster than the cycle that preceded it. The second cycle was that of stimulus response. And stimulus response main aspect was birth of animals. The third cycle was stimulus individual response. The best way I can personally understand that is individuality from yourself compared to the oneness. Because in the previous one, it was just that of stimulus response. To me, this is a gateway or an understanding of the oneness that some spiritualists like to talk about. In the fourth cycle, the consciousness cycle that came into play was that of similarities and differences. This would mean would find out what's different from each other, how things were similar, and the main event was the cavemen, who are now organized in tribes. The fifth cycle, that of reasoning. The main event was that we could actually speak. For so long, it took many of hundreds of thousands of years to be able to go from the stage of grunts and groans and short words to be able to put sentences together and add to two and three syllable words. It was also the end of her story. I will refer more to Ian Lungold to talk about that, but overall, that seems to have created a major transition. The sixth cycle is that of rule and law. The big event was modern day humans starting to build society. Now, one of the things that I notice within these cycles is when you get to a start of a cycle and the middle of a cycle, what often can happen are major events. Therefore, around 5,000 years ago, what was the major event that took place? That's when the Bible stated the world began. And if that has anything to do with her story moving to his story, well, maybe it's coincidental. Around the middle part of this would take us to around 1000 AD, 800, 700. I don't know what happened during this time. This is where history is pretty much lost, or the short period of time. When we move into the seventh cycle, that was a cycle of power. And 256 years ago, approximately, would take us to about around 1750. That was a major period in time when we had the Americanism come into play. Now, before, it was rule and law as the code, and around the halfway period, that's when that consciousness really comes into play. So, roughly around 800 AD, rule should have been the main consciousness in play, and within about 50, 60 years ago, power would have been the major consciousness. That's roughly around 1950 for this to be the case. And when we take a look at how society has created things to massive degrees within this time frame, the large buildings, when you consider the technology boom that's come into play, power was at major forces within this time frame. The next cycle, or the previous cycle, or the one that we're finishing off now, is that of ethics. Ethics doesn't mean everybody does the right thing, although it should be the net result to do more of the right things, but more so to the point that you are conscious of what ethics contains. You thus would start to feel really bad, at least worse than you did before, when you do bad things. More of a guilt trip more than anything. And this is now switched to the amount of months that were left within the Mayan calendar. So the midway point came within around 39, 31, within somewhere in this area here. So therefore, if there's 12 months in a year, then that would mean around 3 years before the end of the Mayan calendar date. Therefore, if the Mayan calendar ends in October of 2011, then the midway point would have been the October of 2008 change, where the economics, the stock market, Lehman Brothers was at a full-blown collapse. The major event during this time frame was the technology revolution. The ninth cycle is that of co-creation. Now we're set to how many days are left. Where I think we are now is roughly around this 1 or 2 period in here. Don't know for sure. In fact, when I look at the biblical prophecy, where nobody knows the day, the month, or sorry, the day, the hour, I think this refers to this of the Mayan calendar. And if that is true, then nobody will know the day or the hour. I'll explain that in the next so many seconds from now. But basically, when you get down towards here, I and so many people will still be making a guessing game to when the Mayan calendar comes to an end. I think the easiest sign for this is the coincidences factor. When they start to seem very common, then you're going to be somewhere here in the middle. As you go into the earlier stages, then whatever the new cycle is very light. It becomes noticeable, and the more common one as you move into the middle, and as you move into the end, you're getting close to mastering it for its time frame. We move on to the 10th cycle. I have cycle be an understanding with a question mark. That comes from source energy. I have no idea what the cycle would be. The cycle cannot end at 9 periods because the way the math works, as you can see how these numbers get smaller and smaller, this has to keep on going until it gets to 0. Therefore, this cycle, which starts with 12 and a half days or 12 and a quarter days to go, would last about a little under 12 days. What events will take place? Well, that's tough. That's very tough to determine. I think the currency coming to an end would most likely come either within this period here, 30 days before it ends, or sometime in here. And when I talked about it being nobody knows the day, the hour, around this period when you have a day and 6 hours left, you're going to know the Mayan calendar is coming to an end soon, but you won't know if it's 2 days or 3 days or 8 hours. The energy should be very high because more things happen in less time. So when you go from cycle 1, 11 to 12, that's a cycle difference of 6 hours. Where today, or the previous cycle of ethics, you had a cycle that went from about 3 months. So the amount of things that happen in 3 months should happen in 6 hours over here. When we move into the 11th cycle, this is where things seem to get really turbo, really hyper aggressive, and I'm guessing it's an ascension phase to the new world. At this point here, you're going to know how that it's time. When you're 3 hours away, you know it's hours away, but you still probably won't know the hour. Cycle 12, well, you know the hours now. but you won't know how many minutes we are away. And in cycle 13, when you're talking about seconds left, well, you won't know if it's 20 seconds to go or 40 seconds to go until we get to that final period. This is all speculation on my part as far as stuff like the no one knowing the date and time type thing. Now, in the final cycle, I call this a phase 13 seconds of infinity, and I made a video on that a couple years ago. The reason why is because I'm guessing it's going to be around 6.5 seconds when this all comes to an end. It says 8.8 on here, but the final cycle takes about 1.8 seconds, which would bring it down to 7 when this actually completes, because this is how much is left at the start of each one. So at the start of 13, there'd be 8.8 seconds to go. If we take that number, we double it, then we come up with 13 seconds, if of course it's 6.5. And I double it because of the law of polarity. Because my theory is when the Mayan calendar comes to an end, it restarts itself. It's plain and simple. Thus, as every cycle starts to go down from stage to stage, you would start to go up. Thus, if, say, in cycle 10, this took 12 days and 6 hours to go from here to the end, it would take 12 days and 6 hours to get back to this point again. Thus, I see this as a halfway point within society, within consciousness, within Earth, within the universe. And thus, we would have another 15 billion years of the solar system being alive. I also have a theory that we have between positive and negative energy. That as we continue to move forward, the amount of positive energy increases and the amount of negative energy increases. That's hard to determine right now because there's more and more things happening. So even though there's less negativity in the world because there's more things happening and the consciousness is currently more negative than positive, a lot of the things that end up happening are going to be negative. Now, as far as what this means for the economy in gold and silver, we'll use the silver charts to show things a little bit better. We'll use the line chart for silver going back to 1968. This is the LBMA data and the 100-ounce price for silver. The numbers on the bottom of the screen represent how many days it has been since January 1st, 1968. I'm going to go over 3 different possible scenarios for silver. The first one will be if the calendar happens to end in the fall of this year. The second, if it ends in December of 2012, and the final one, if it's December 13 or if it's 2013 and beyond. I quite frequently get asked where silver is going to go or what time frame something's going to happen. I really can't answer that too well because I don't know when this thing is actually going to come to an end. The earlier it ends, the quicker these things are going to happen. And overall, this cycle is that about destroying the negativity, replacing that with positivity. As far as currency is concerned, it is backed by debt. Debt is 100% guaranteed. It is 100% guaranteed that a majority of people are going to be suffering because of this. And that is why it seems 100% the currency either has to die or it has to transition to a positive manifestation some way, somehow. Therefore, as far as where silver will be trading at if it ends this year, I would like to use the comparison, I think, that I've been following for the last few months as the best gauge for that. It might be a little coincidental that it just happens to end. The comparison, that is, at the end of August of 2011, which would be about 6-7 weeks before the calendar would come to an end. That move would take us to 140, and somewhat fast, something in the area of this, something like that. If that were to take place, then what happens after that? You probably have a decent sized correction, and then boom, there's your explosion. There's the death of the currency. and the changes of this world are taking place. Most likely, when gold reaches around 2000, that's when I think we'll hit a second gear. What will silver be when gold's at 1,000? You can only speculate and guess. I think the ratio will be around 20 to 1, so that would be about $100 per ounce for the price of silver. Now, if it's December 2012, then things probably will work a little bit differently. Probably work our way up to the $50 an ounce level and probably have a decent size retracement, maybe something in the area of this before the market really starts to take off into the year 2012. If it's much, much later, 2013, 2014, then there's going to be a lot of times where not much would be going on, as well as a decent sized correction. And that could mean something in the area of maybe like this, and then fall back down before coming back up. I don't know how far it would go back lower, but if it's 3-4 years from coming close to an end, then you'd be going through over 1,000 different days of trading. Finally, as far as where we'll be heading after the Mayan calendar and after this, all the dust settles, most likely a move towards a currency that would be a non-debt based one, much better than what we have now, that would be backed by real assets, all the precious metals and base metals, any real asset that you can store and be used within its value, or its value can go up and down within the system. Not only would you use precious metals as stated, but even fresh foods and items that don't have that long of a shelf life, as long as the inventories can be tracked really well. And with technology, that would be very easy. As far as a resource based economy is concerned, that will most likely be a worldwide event. How long that would take? Probably many decades to centuries. I think the more probable thing would be some areas in the world would have a resource based economy. Some areas of the world would be on a standard of gold and real assets, and they could work together as the resource based economy people can trade within the capitalistic society. So I think that's probably got the best likelihood for scenarios. So thank you for watching and have yourself a great day. Bye bye.